All right, let's jump right in. We're about to explore something really powerful, an imagined lost manuscript from the great Russian poet Anna Akhmatova. And look, these aren't just poems. This is a voice from the very heart of the 20th century's darkest moments. It's a testimony that we're going to piece together, almost as if we're the first ones to ever see it.
This single line, this is the key to everything. It's the central haunting feeling that just echoes through every single page of these notebooks. It's the voice of a survivor, someone who's left behind after, as she puts it, all the beautiful ones have gone into the earth. It's that chilling weight of being the one who has to remember.
So we're going to treat this like an act of discovery. Let's open these lost pages together and try to understand not just the words, but the world that created them, and the woman who had to endure it all just to write them down.
Just look at this timeline. It maps a personal life directly onto a national catastrophe. Akhmatova's story isn't just sit against the backdrop of 20th century Russia, it is the story of 20th century Russia. Every major event you see here, revolution, execution, terror, censorship, that wasn't just abstract history for her. That was a deeply personal wound.
To really get these notebooks, you have to understand this period. The Great Terror, it wasn't a metaphor. It was a real knock on the door in the middle of the night. It was people just disappearing. The sheer scale of it is almost impossible to wrap your head around. And that was the air Akhmatova had to breathe. That was the silence she had to write against.
So, this experience completely forged the central theme of her late work, what she called the weight of witness. Her role totally transformed. She wasn't just a poet talking about her own feelings anymore. She became a kind of vessel for the memory and the suffering of an entire generation. She felt compelled to bear witness.
And you can hear that transformation right here in her own words. While she was waiting outside the prison for news of her son Lev, who'd been arrested, she had this realization that she wasn't just there for herself. She embodied the collective grief of every single woman standing there with her. Her personal pain blew up into a national pain, and this experience? This became the furnace where her most famous work, Requiem, was forged.
17? That is not just a number. That is 17 months. For 17 months, she stood in those prison lines, in the brutal cold, just waiting. Can you even imagine the sheer physical and emotional endurance that takes? This wasn't some brief tragedy. It was a long daily ritual of hope and dread that basically defined a whole chapter of her life. For Akhmatova, surviving wasn't some victory you celebrate, it was a burden. And she explains it with this incredible metaphor that survival was just an accumulation of losses, a daily act of waking up and carrying the ghosts of everyone who didn't make it. Every day she lived was just another small death, strung on the thread of her own breath. So, the big question is, how did she survive all this? Well, the notebooks show us her core strategy. Poetry itself became something much more than art. In a world that was literally designed to crush the human spirit, poetry became her tool for survival. It was a secret act of resistance against a state that demanded total silence.
And the shift in her perspective is just stark. As a young woman, poetry was about self-expression. But the terror? It burned all of that away, leaving something much more essential. Poetry wasn't a choice anymore. It wasn't a luxury. It became a duty, a way to record what was happening when every other form of truth-telling was being snuffed out, and a way to hold on to that inner self the state was trying to erase.
And this is how they actually did it. This wasn't just writing. This was basically espionage. A poem like Requiem couldn't exist on paper. Paper was evidence. It was a death sentence. So it lived in the minds of her friends. They became what she called living archives, passing the words from mouth to ear, preserving the truth in the one place the secret police couldn't get to, human memory. This, right here, was her core belief. The state could control every part of your physical life, but it couldn't confiscate the inner world of art. That creative impulse, that line of a poem just rising in your throat, that was sovereign. It was older and stronger than any political regime. And honestly, that belief is what got her through.
Then, the notebooks take a turn into their most intimate section. We could call it Conversations with Ghosts. See, having outlived almost everyone she ever loved, Akhmatova started speaking with them on the page. She wrote these unsent letters, processing all her grief and guilt and memories in this deeply private dialogue. And that's the real question she's wrestling with, right? How do you keep a relationship going with the dead? For Akhmatova, the answer was to write them, to just continue the conversation in her mind and on the page, keeping their spirits, and even their arguments,
alive inside of her.
In this imagined letter to her friend and fellow poet, Marina Tsvetareva, who had tragically taken her own life, Akhmatova finds the sense of deep solidarity. She sees their separate, incredibly difficult lives as part of one single shared project, this sacred duty, especially for women, to bear witness to the horrors of their time, no matter what it costs them.
Next, she speaks to her close friend Osip Mandelstam. He was arrested and killed in the Gulag for a single poem that criticized Stalin. And she asks him the ultimate question, was your art worth your life? And then she answers for him, because she knows. She affirms their shared, terrible conviction that this is what poetry is for. It's to speak the truth, even if it gets you killed.
And then comes this, an unsent confession to her son, Lev. He spent years in the prison camps, and he blamed her for it. He believed her fame as a poet made him a target. And right here, she confronts that terrible, impossible choice she made between being a mother and being a witness. And she acknowledges the immense personal cost. It was a conflict that just haunted her to the very end.
So all of this builds to a final, incredibly urgent message. The last pages of these notebooks, they aren't about finding peace. They're about the duty of memory and about the very nature of truth itself.
This was her ultimate self-definition. More than a poet, more than a survivor, she was a witness. Her job, as she saw it, was to stand in that gap between something happening and it being erased by time or by the state. Her whole life's work was an effort to just hold that line and say, simply, this happened. Do not forget.
And her final plea is so vital. She was terrified that future generations would read her work, especially Requiem, and see it as just literature, a powerful metaphor, a symbol. But these final notes insist on its literal truth. The frostbite was real, the terror was real. She wants us to feel the physical reality, the actual human cost behind those devastatingly beautiful lines. And this is the question the notebooks leave us with. Akhmatova did her part. She bore witness, she wrote it down, she preserved it. But testimony is a two-way street, isn't it? It requires a speaker, yes, but it also requires a listener. The notebooks turn the responsibility back to us, and they ask, what is our duty when we inherit these stories? Who listens now?